watching the second part of our interview with Professor Kees Overbeke from Eindhoven University of Technology. And Kees has more than 25 years of experience in designing products and in doing research in industrial design. And in this second interview, Kees is going to explain more in depth about industrial design. So, Kees, can you explain to us how did industrial design evolve?
How did it evolve? But you mean over the last 100 years, or how did it evolve?
When did it all start?
It all started with industrialization, when things had to be made in large quantities. So you have design, but you have also the word industrial. So it's designed for industry.
Okay.
So it started with industrialization. But the first real design movements were movements that came out of ideology. You had the arts and crafts movement in Scotland, Great Britain, and in England later on, which was a sort of a counter movement where people wanted to go back to the crafts thing. That's why it's called arts and crafts, no? So to make the singular and unique pieces that people wanted, okay? On the other hand, a bit later, you had, because the arts and craft people, they didn't like the mass-produced things. In the beginning, everybody liked the mass-produced things for one reason, because they all were the same. No? And before that, people couldn't make the same thing. Because if you go to somebody and ask, make me 6 chairs, they will all be different. No? But now they could make 6 identical chairs. If you go to a shop nowadays, you can find 6 or 12 or as many as you want, identical chairs. But that wasn't possible before. But at some point, the arts and crafts people said, yeah, but it's all identical. We want unique again. So it was a sort of anti-movement. But a bit later, there were movements that really got into the grip of industrial production. That is, for instance, the Bauhaus movement in Germany, who also started from an ideology, in this case a socialist-inspired ideology, where they wanted to make people's life, and especially workers' life, better. Because the workers were living in slums in the big cities, and these Bauhaus people wanted to have them a better life. So they designed houses with large windows and better hygiene and stuff like that, to let the air in, to let the sun in, and make people happier. Also, they designed furniture that could be mass produced, so it would be cheap, because it was for the not so rich. And then they also designed the furniture, the cutlery, the china, everything that you need in a house at a very cheap price. That movement was decapitated really when Hitler came to power in Germany, and most of the people had to flee to the United States, where they started a new Bauhaus in Chicago, but that really, they couldn't really do anymore what they were doing in Germany, because there is no socialist tradition in the United States. So they went to work for the rich people. After the war, there was a sort of revival of the Bauhaus stuff. But now it was produced in very small quantities for the rich, because it became a status symbol, because these were very nicely crafted, nicely designed objects and stuff like that. So it became stuff for the rich. And you can still find it in shops, special design shops. Okay, at the same time, after the war, you had the modernist movement, and also the dying of the modernist movement. And after the modernist movement died around the beginning of the 60s or the end of the 50s, there came an end to the great ideologies. Postmodernism saying, well, We don't do big ideologies anymore, and everything depends, right? There is no truth anymore in that sort of sense for design. So, and the problem, I think, with design at that point was that it got lost in beauty, in nice forms, and design became sort of, how shall I put it, became sort of, form giving, as we say in English, but it's not an English word, but it's a translation from the German, no? Formgebung, Gestaltung, stuff like that. It is, and it became lost in beauty and in shells, making things, a beautiful shell around another thing. And that is what was being taught in many schools, really, how to make nice forms. The Ulm school, that flourished for a few years after the war in Ulm, Germany, and we know best by the old Braun products, because the Braun products were really Ulm products, and they tried to make it, they tried to turn design into scientific design. So they measured everything, and it's about the beauty that is in proportions. Okay, no ornaments, as simple as possible, and work with the proportions and the curves and stuff like that. Many designs nowadays are still very much influenced by that sort of design. If you look at the iPod, although it's designed by an Englishman, in America it is a very sort of German product, I think. But anyway, at the same time, I think that design missed out on a very important change within the industrial world. That is the birth of electronics. If you look at many products, many electronic products nowadays on the market, the only thing that really has been designed is the shell. As I was saying, it's made beautiful. But the whole interaction with the thing and the whole working of the thing and the way it speaks to you and stuff like that hasn't really been designed. It's been made by IT engineers or HCI people.
And I guess you find that a problem.
It is not no, it's not a problem, but I'm just saying it's no longer part of what design used to be, industrial design. Industrial design, as far as I'm concerned, became limited to what we call the dreaded S word. And that's a word industrial designers fear to use, and that's styling. Yeah. So the outer shelf of the thing. I think nowadays what design is trying to do, it's not since yesterday, but let's say for the last 10 years, what design is trying to do is to get design thinking back into interaction design. That's a bit the evolution of design these last 100 years. Of course, this is all very sketchy and it's not as clear as or as unidirectional as I'm posing it now, but this is the sort of general,
the main line.
General line.
Yeah. Okay, so let's go a bit deeper again. Yeah. And you mention in your chapter phenomenology and pragmatism as theoretical anchors within industrial design. Yeah. And can you explain why these are anchors?
No, these are not anchors as such in how shall I put it? These are not anchors as such in design, in the practice of design, but I think they should be in the scientific approach to design.
Yeah.
I explain. The Bauhaus people were very much influenced by psychology as well, by Gestalt psychology. Okay, not going into detail here because that would lead us too far. But anyway, the Gestalt psychologists claim a few things. Okay, that the whole is more than the sum of the parts. That's the most famous one. You know, and all the laws of perception, like the laws of that is really very well known. Readers who want to read it can refer to Kafka. Anyway, that movement also moved to the United States, also from Germany to the United States before the war. Now, these people very much influenced somebody like Gibson, because Gibson was also a student of Kafka. Now we get into a bit of a difficult field. What Gibson is claiming, Gibson formulated a completely new theory of perception. And this theory of perception states that we perceive the world in terms of our action possibilities. That's not an easy thing to understand. It's an interactive thing, right? Mm-hmm. That means that a fly will, for instance, see the ceiling here as sittable.
Mm-hmm. And we won't.
And we won't.
Yeah.
Because we have a different body.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I see this chair as sittable because the way I'm built, no? Mm-hmm. And because of my behind, it fits in, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Now you can say, what's so important about that? Well, it's important for designers because it can help designers because they have to design these things, right? So they have to design in a way action possibilities and also make clear in what they design, what you can do with it, okay? So that is very important. In that sense, if you look at the first of the Don Norman's books, The Design of Everyday Things, he talks quite a lot about affordances and stuff, right? But there's something else. This is psychology, and you were talking about philosophy, no? So let's take a step back. What is the essential thing here? It is, where does meaning come from? Okay, mm-hmm. Because you want to design meaning, and meaning, if you followed me, means what can I do with it, mm-hmm. in this case. Mm-hmm. It's not an abstract meaning, it's not the meaning that we use, the term we use usually during the day. No one said, what is the meaning of this symbol, or what is the meaning? That's not what I mean. It's the meaning in the sense of what can I do with it? How can I touch it? How can I change it? Mm-hmm. How can I? Okay. Now, where does meaning come from? Classically speaking, in all classical philosophies, meanings is constructed, right? You studied philosophy for some time, yeah. So you should know that. I mean, in idealism and in empirism, now let's say the big two areas in Western philosophy, they both say that meaning is constructed. Right? Mm-hmm. Although the mechanisms in both philosophies are different, but that's what they claim, right? Now you have people like the pragmatist movement in the United States, that is Dewey, the philosopher Dewey, and he's very well known these days because everybody talks about experiences, and he wrote these books about experience and mm-hmm. stuff like that, right? Very interesting. But also people in Europe at the same time were inventing a completely new philosophy, and that philosophy is called phenomenology. Mm-hmm. Some people call Heidegger part of this movement, although he wouldn't completely agree, I suppose, but anyway. But one of the proponents is the French philosopher Merleau-Ponty. And Merleau-Ponty, to state it very simply, because it's very complicated, all this philosophy, you know that. But to state it very simply, he says that the experience, or the sensing, the sensual being in the world, mm-hmm. is primary to understanding. That's one thing. Mm-hmm. So it's primary to thinking. And the second thing is that what he says is that sensing the world, experiencing the world is always meaningful in itself. Mm-hmm. So meaning is given in our interaction with the world. We are part of a system that is meaningful. Mm-hmm. Okay? So every thinking is built on this primary thing. There's a primacy of experiencing. Mm-hmm. Now, how to develop this and all that, it's not very, very, very easy, but there are some very good books written on the subject. Now, why is this important? Because designers are creators of meaning, no? And if you think of meaning as something that comes from abstraction, you will do other things than when you think of meaning coming from experience, right? Meaning in phenomenology is not a result of thinking, but comes before thinking. Now, you can imagine that when you start designing, designers quite naturally understand what I'm meaning on this side here. That meaning is given. I don't have to explain that. I have to explain that to scientists because they don't believe me, right? Because scientists think that the explanation is of a higher nature and has more primacy than the lower things, okay? Classical views on perception, for instance, say there's light falling on my retina, all sorts of cells are, and centrally I'm going to reconstruct a world in my head, and from that I get the experience from the world, okay? But there's thinking involved, there's comparison involved, there's knowing involved, and stuff like that. Now, if you look at Gibson, he says there's no thinking. You don't need to think for an affordance to work. I can see directly, that's why it's called direct perception. I can see directly that something is sittable. If it's well designed. If it's well designed, of course, yeah. I mean, that means if it fits the sort of person I am, and the way I'm built. Something is differently sittable for a cat than for a human being. We noticed it this afternoon, no? So that sort of difference is very important. Now, in science, phenomenology is not used because that's not what science does. So one of the things we have to do is to try to introduce this notion, which is quite natural for designers, because they trust their intuition, no? I'm using the forbidden word. They trust their intuition, so for designers there's no problem, but we have to move this philosophy, this new way of thinking, which is like half a century old, this new way of thinking into the focus, I think the focus of Western thinking. That's what I'd like to do. We need new models of thinking because I think that the old ones are exhausted.
So do you think this is where things are heading in the future?
I don't think that, no, I can't be sure that they will be heading, but I would love to see them heading in that direction.
Is this what you're going to focus on?
Yeah.
Yeah?
Yeah.
And is this what you're going to advise other people to focus on? Or
Yes, I was doing it today.
Before at the conference?
This conference today I was doing it. But it's not, the problem is it's not easy. We are not trained to think in interaction. We are trained to think in division and opposition. So what should we do to go this path? You have to go to other cultures, and you have to go. The first thing what I've been doing now is to go to Southern Europe. We've been excluding Latin Europe, as I call it, excluding completely from the endeavors in interaction design, which is completely Northern European, Scandinavian and a few more countries, and Anglo-Saxon. And I think we should include other ways of thinking. So I think it's no surprise that, for instance, Merleau-Ponty is French. So, for instance, what we're doing now, the 1st of September, we will have a workshop on where a philosopher will come and talk to us about that and explain that. Anyway, there are lots of books about it, so if people want to read, they have to go and look into it.
And you'll be quoting those books and put them into your references in your chapter. Okay.
There is one that I should mention, though. It's by Abrams, an American author. It's an American book, and it's called The Spell of the Sensuous.
Okay.
Isn't that a nice title?
So let's talk about the object in a more abstract way. When you design an object, you're also designing a new reality, you write in your chapter.
Yeah.
And what do you mean by that?
What I mean by that is that when you design something and you throw it in the world, it's being produced, okay, then it will have an effect on people. It will change people. Think of the mobile telephone and then connect it to the way we now make appointments.
Mm-hmm.
You can change into the last minute, no?
Exactly, yeah.
And so it's completely changing our world. There is some very nice thinking done about that, and by Peter Paul Verbeek, both the Netherlands, and he's written a rather marvelous book, and I'll include that as well.
Mm-hmm.
But on the surface, you can, if you introduce, let's say, trains in the society, and planes in the society, it will change it.
Okay.
Yeah.
So then how do you decide if it's a good change, if it's a desirable change? That's kind of a responsibility, I would say.
That is a responsibility, yeah. Designers have a very big responsibility in that. And you can have two attitudes in there. No? Either you say, well, you know, I'm not responsible for how people use what I make. No, you can, for instance, I designed cutlery and, you know, a knife, no? And somebody kills somebody else with that knife. It's not my responsibility because I wasn't there and I wasn't, okay? And I think that's quite correct. On the other hand, you could, and we need knives anyway, no? To eat. Right, now on the other hand, you could say, yeah, with more interactive stuff and more electronic stuff that have far bigger, let's say, impact on our lives, you could ask yourself, yeah, but what do I want? How do I want people to change through the thing that I'm designing, right? But that's an ethical question. And that as we have no longer big ideologies, people have to decide for themselves in what sort of direction they want to push people. And they're good people and bad people. Huh? This is, I know it's not a very satisfying answer, but what we're trying to do when educating the students is to make them aware of that and aware of the sort of choices they make by confronting them with ethics and morals and stuff like that. That's what we try.
So that's actually all you can do.
That is, at the moment is all we are allowed to do. Yes.
What would you like to do?
Intensify that. I don't know what's good for the world or bad for the world. I mean, I don't have that sort of knowledge, and I don't like ideologies more than anybody else. But there are some things going on of which many people say, I don't like that very much, but nothing is changing really. But it's part of the educational process, I think, to make people aware of it. The problem, as I said before, is our societies don't have a big project. So that is we don't have big ideologies. We don't know where we're going. But anyway, that's for them. I mean, it's a political question in the end as well. And some people say everything you do in design is political. But I don't know if I want to go that far, but one could say that. Okay.
So let's just talk a little bit here in the end about your personal motivation. What was your initial motivation to work with and study industrial design?
Oh my God. Now I have to remember.
It's a long time ago.
It's a long time ago. No, I studied psychology quite a long time ago. And at some point, somebody asked me, would you like to do a PhD? There's somebody I knew. And she was asking me, would you like to do a PhD in industrial design? Because I'm looking for a researcher and I think you would too. Because I never thought I would be a researcher and I never planned to be a researcher. I was quite old, if I may say.
How old were you?
27, 28 or something now, which I find quite old. And I have been working in completely different subjects. So at some point, I went to Delft, where I did my PhD, Delft University of Technology in the Netherlands also. And I started to work there on my PhD, and I did my PhD together with a German designer, which was quite exciting because in the beginning we didn't understand each other at all. Mm-hmm. Because it's not easy to understand if you're not a designer. And I came from the old school, no? Also the old thinking school. It's not easy to understand what motivates a designer. Can I give an example?
Mm-hmm. Please do.
One of the first times we walked together in the street, he said to me, "Do you see this line in this car?" I said, "A line? There is no line." Because a line for me is something drawn, no? Mm-hmm. But he was talking about the proportions in the car and how it was really fluid and stuff like that. Later on I understood, but I didn't understand what he was talking about. It was a completely strange word for me. Mm-hmm. But after some time, I started to really find it intriguing. This word was intriguing to me. It took like 5-6 years to understand what motivated these people and what really made them tick and made them work so hard and be so motivated for what they were doing. Mm-hmm. But after that time, 6 years, I was hooked. So I stayed. I never want to go back to the old profession. So
you're going to stay for many years?
I don't know. I don't know how many years I'm going to stay, but I'm not going to change professions, if that's what you mean. No. Mm.
Thank you so much, Kees, for your time and interest in explaining this to us.
My pleasure.
And for taking your time out of the DIS conference. If you want to know more about industrial design, you should read Kees' chapter at interactiondesign.org. Here you'll also find more interesting chapters written by other thought leaders and inventors. And you can also find videos like this one. Thank you so much for watching.